Hey guys, this is Drew here from UpTech, and I was working on a little project and ran into a scenario where I needed to contribute back to an open source project, and I've heard numerous times from numerous people that they'd love to contribute to an open source project, but it's somewhat overwhelming and they don't know where to begin and where to start. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to just kind of, have a real moment and see exactly what's involved and how I go about it and what I'm going to do in this case. So let me give you a little backstory on what I was working on. So at UpTech, we have this Swift library that I started called Constraid, and it's an auto layout constraint uh, library to facilitate making and managing auto layout constraints easier in Swift. So it's applicable to iOS and macOS. And I've been working on a macOS application recently, and I've been having so much difficulty with Xcode's auto completion not working properly that I decided, okay, it's time to not depend on auto completion and just reference documentation more to get the answers I need. So the tool that I use for documentation is Dash, if you're familiar with that. So here's Dash over here. It's basically a tool where you can load all of your documentation locally, and it syncs it when there's updates automatically. So for example, I have like the Apple API reference here, and you can see I have references in different tabs for different classes. So this is the NSTable column class, and here's the NSTable delegate I was referencing, so on and so forth. But they have all these different languages, frameworks, libraries, etc. So in Ruby land, like I have the Sinatra docs here. I can go into the Sinatra docs, and I can look at all the classes and the documentation around those classes. Can look at Sinatra base, etc. And then it organizes it all really nicely and makes it nicely searchable. So it's really easy for me while I'm coding to jump over to Dash or use the Dash integration with Alfred to search for something specific. And so I decided, sweet, I'm using Constraid a lot in this project, and we have some decent documentation in the README, but it would be really nice if the documentation that's in the code was easily usable and searchable inside of Dash. So I started poking around Dash to see, if that was possible. And right on their main website, they have, generate your own doc sets. I was like, sweet. So generating doc sets, you can look in here. They don't really have anything covering Swift. So then I thought, well, let's look at, what I currently use to generate documentation, and that's a tool called Jazzy for Swift. And so I dug into Jazzy a bit and found out that Jazzy natively just automatically generates Dash doc sets. So that's great, right? So I was like, sweet, all right, let's produce the doc set. So I went to my project and generated a doc set, and it successfully created a doc set. And then I tried to submit that doc set to the Git repository for user submissions. Capelli, which is, so Capelli is the guy who writes Dash, and he's created this Dash user contributions repository, which is linked to from his website. And this repository, walks you through the process of creating your own doc sets, like what their versioning guidelines are, what their doc set contributing checklist. I went through all of this stuff, read all this stuff. The Jazzy stuff basically automates all of this stuff for you, and then gives you a doc set out at the end that you can then, set up and create, the actual change set, which involves like adding a README the first time, and then a JSON file that describes the doc set, and then the tar gz, which is the actual doc set. And this is just his submission process. You submit this, and then he puts it up in the CMS and the CDN, and takes it from there, and then updates this. This way, people know who's maintaining this, how to generate the docs, etc. So I did that, and then the CI failed for it with an error, and so I was trying to figure out exactly what was going on. So I started chatting with Capelli. And so here's the output of the error that I was getting, which I didn't realize was an error initially. I just thought it was a warning, but he was saying that was actually the error. And so I asked him if he could explain what was going on, and he did, which was awesome. And so inside of the doc set, there is this DSIDX file, which is actually a SQLite 3 database, and that is what Dash uses as its index to make searching capable and perform it. And so the problem in this case was, if you look at this screenshot right here, so he took the screenshot, and you can see in the database there's a number of entries which have this null value where the type is, and Dash is not cool with that, which is why the CI tests failed, was because these null values in type. And so basically Jazzy was producing an incorrect or an invalid SQLite 3 index for the doc set. So the one thing that I noticed looking at all of this was that, this first thing here is global variables, the next one's enumerations, extensions, functions, type aliases. And all of those things are like organizational structures. They're not like functions or elements or enums or extensions or actual language constructs. And so I had to figure out what we should actually have in place of that type. So if we go back to Dash and we look at their generating docs, we can see they have section 12.5 right here, which is populating the SQL index. So this is where they tell you how to create this index starting at 12.4. 12.5 then is all about how you populate it, and that you need a name, type, and the path. And they give you specifications on that. And then they give you a list of supported types. And so I started looking through these, and the closest type that I could find that didn't feel like it would potentially be a language feature or have a specific meaning was section, which is right here. So I used the type section and manually opened the SQLite 3 file and decided to change that and test that, and then the CI system passed. So that's a giant pain in the butt, though, to do that manually every time I want to generate these doc sets, especially because right now I wanted to go back in time and generate doc sets for previous versions as well. And I didn't want to have to do this entire process and repackage the doc sets and all of this stuff. So that made me think, well, what's really the problem? The real problem is that Jazzy is not working correctly. Jazzy's producing an invalid SQLite 3 index for the doc set.